Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I created a PowerPoint presentation, but I'm going to try to skip it as much as I can and just sort of speak to you as an audience for the sake of sort of time and sanity. So let me introduce myself. My name is Scott Anderson, and I work for IREX, which is a nonprofit organization based out of Washington, D.C. It works in the domains of media, technology, education, and governance in around 100 countries around the world. I'm the director of a program called the Advancing MOOCs for Development Initiative, which is a program that concentrates on the research of MOOCs for workforce development purposes, and also focuses on the promotion of MOOCs among government policymakers and academics, and the potential of businesses to use MOOCs as a way of recruiting and promoting candidates for business purposes. So not specifically teachers, but I've tailored this talk to teachers because I think that's an important thing that we've found out about who's using MOOCs, and I'll get into that in a minute. So that's the program. It operates in 3 countries, the Philippines, Colombia, and South Africa, and obviously the Philippines is probably what is of most interest to this group. But let me, before we start, does everyone know what a MOOC is? Because we sort of assume that sometimes when we talk with an audience, and I just want to make sure that everyone knows. So a MOOC is really a massive open online course. And how we define that is really difficult to say because people have different definitions of what that means. Is something that's online that's offered by the government. For example, in the Philippines, there's an organization called TASCHA. And TASCHA is a government organization which offers basic courses to overseas workers that allows them to get certified. And this can be something very simple. It can be culinary skills. It can be, how to become a professional waiter or a manager of a restaurant. Not the traditional MOOCs that people associate with edX or Stanford. So what is it? Is it something that offers a certificate? The only thing we know is that when we try to define a MOOC, we try to define it as something that anyone can take, anyone can register for. Free is no longer universal. That was the original idea, is it would be free. Increasingly, MOOCs are no longer free. They're certificate driven, and companies earn revenue from that. So that's sort of the definition of what an open online course is, that you have the ability anywhere, sitting at any computer in the world, to take it. And increasingly, they're no longer timed to specific classes, but they're things that you can do in your spare time. So one of the things that I want to talk about is not only the change in MOOCs, but the demographic changes that we're seeing in MOOC users. The original MOOC users were people who were of very high education levels, and they were limited primarily to the English-speaking world and to about 4 countries. Increasingly, this is no longer true. The original countries were Australia, Great Britain, and the United States were the big MOOC users. The biggest MOOC demographic now is actually India. But increasingly what we're finding is that it's not the universities per se that people are really interested in taking for MOOCs. It's that there are more mini MOOCs that lend themselves to workforce development skills that are designed by local content providers. And this is often, like for example in the Philippines, the University of the Philippines, which has how to develop a skill set, how to interview for a job, how to conduct yourself when you're learning the basic skills of self-presentation. And so for example, the other thing is in Colombia, there's an organization called SENA, which is a national government body, which also provides MOOCs. And these are all for very basic, sort of simple skills. Excel, how to use Word, how to use a computer, how to do basic programming. And these are not the courses that people are taking from the major MOOC providers. Increasingly, in places that we call the developing world, there are MOOCs that are taken for very, very basic skills that lead to business development purposes. And so governments are increasingly playing a role in this. And this is true outside, especially countries like the United States and Great Britain, where certification is not nearly as important as it is in many other societies. In many societies, if you want to get a job, you need a certificate saying you're qualified for that job. So in a way, it makes sense for government institutions to offer MOOCs that are certified by the government rather than going through academic institutions and getting that. Now, it doesn't mean that businesses don't admire the fact that people go out and they complete a MOOC, get certification for it. There are a number of programs for example, the Bank of Jordan has an open MOOC that anyone can take, and if you score in the top 1%, they will hire you, the Bank of Jordan. If you score in the top 5%, you'll become like an alternate candidate for them. So businesses can take advantage of this technology to help recruit individuals. But as I said before, because government institutions are often the body that you need, MOOCs may become something more of a government phenomenon than they will an academic phenomenon. And this is just a change we're seeing. So let me see if I can find a few slides here that might assist us. I'm just going to kind of skip through. Oh, so what? Yeah, this is the other thing. So MOOCs were meant. This was created at the height of the MOOC boom. 2012, everyone thought that MOOCs were going to change the world, and I use this sort of ironically now because there was an enormous hype that surrounded the educational and academic aspects of this, that it would drive the university model out of business. And this was particularly true in places like the United States, where the costs of college education are extremely prohibitive, or entrance requirements in places like India, where the process is extremely prohibitive. And so getting into the university, for example, in India, it's like 1 in 5,000 applicants for the top tech schools. So one way of demonstrating your commitment and your ability is by taking courses. But now, this sort of rush to get into the MOOC business has changed significantly. What we have learned, though, and this is interesting, is that 39% of all MOOC users are now teachers. There are people who concentrate on education for a living, an education background. And the primary goal of these things were not certificates, but it was for teachers to improve their skills within the classroom. And increasingly, these MOOCs, which were all academic at a high college level, are now serving sort of K through 12 audiences, or people that want to develop very basic business skills. So it's moving away in many ways from the sort of technology STEM-based MOOCs, which everyone associated with in 2012, 2013, into something that is extremely localized content that people can access as long as they have a computer. And this is another obstacle which we obviously face in many parts of the world, which is internet speed and connectivity. But what we found through the research that we've done in the Philippines, South Africa, and Colombia is actually we have a couple interesting findings. And we will have a report coming out in March that will announce some of these findings. But it talks about, we've learned that the demographics of the people within those countries are changing. So it used to be the fact that it was only people who had master's degree or bachelor's degrees that were really taking MOOCs. And increasingly, we've learned this is not true. Income levels also changed for people taking MOOCs. In Colombia and in the Philippines, the majority of online course users were people of middle to lower income now, no longer higher income. And I think that relates directly to the type of MOOCs being offered that are less academic and more focused on government institutions. A third change is women. So MOOCs in like 2012, 2011 were primarily an entirely male phenomenon. Not at all. Several countries now have, Romania being one, Ukraine being another, have now, more women are taking MOOCs than men. And this is a trend we've seen in education generally, so it makes sense. In the United States, there are now more women in medical school, more women in law school, and so we expect this trend to continue. Now, let me see. So what are the advantages of online education for teachers, assuming that you can get access to the internet? And these are assumptions that you can get access to high-speed internet and access to the technology to use it. But many school systems are failing students today. And this is not just in the developing world. This is true in the United States and many other countries. They're failing students because they're designed on a model which is no longer relevant to the modern workforce in the modern world. I mean, should a teacher really be someone stuck in a box lecturing 20 students on subjects that are antiquated, or should it be something that's much more dynamic and much more visual? MOOCs give the advantage of teachers of doing peer-to-peer learning, so they can learn from their contemporaries anywhere in the world. They get rid of time constraints, and most teacher education services are free. But I'd rather talk less about the capacity building of teachers, but what it allows for students. So for students, MOOCs can change the way that we learn and the way that we engage education. And MOOCs, again, in this sense, is a funny word because it implies something higher, but it doesn't have to be. So one of the ways that MOOCs and online educational materials can change education is a gamification factor. So I don't know if you've ever played, like, have you ever worked with Duolingo to learn a language? But it's something that rewards you, and it's visual, and it's graphic, and it stimulates learning in a way that a traditional classroom can't. Because younger children that often would not be able to read a book or do not have the patience to listen to, a lecture, will have the patience to play a video game if it rewards them. And that's also sort of a badges and encouragement mechanism for going forward. The more it is interactive, education that can be interactive rather than rote learning and memorization is something that interactive technologies are very good at and we can use with MOOCs. Also, the multiple stimulation levels. Someone sitting there quietly for hours being lectured by a teacher is only going to retain a small percentage of the information that is presented to them and afforded to them. However, if you involve all the senses, you are far more likely to retain that information. So if there's a touch, a sound, you're hearing things and you're reading them at the same time, the retention of students goes up a great deal. And that adds to digital storytelling, sort of content and memory. Of course, there are obstacles that are associated with any form of online learning. It's extremely hard to reach people who are out of the school system, but it's not impossible. There are community centers in the Philippines, for example. We found 20 of them that basically cater entirely to students who have dropped out of the school system. So they're people who, they may be farmers during the day, but they come to the centers in the evening to get basic certifications that they will need to be licensed by governments to do certain employment related functions. And these community centers are generally free, and that may be a model for reaching children who otherwise could not be reached, because children will gravitate toward computers in a way they won't necessarily gravitate to a classroom. And anything that involves that gamification concept, even more so. So there is a way around the classroom to reach students, and this is something that governments are just now around the world experimenting with. At this point, I just want to turn over the mic and see if people have questions generally. But thank you very much.